In every client-architect relationship, there exists a strong mutual interest. The architect is seeking fame, money, and exposure from the work commissioned to him. In return, the client seeks best, most secure, and the reliable architect services from his architect. The idea of this discussion is to highlight issues influencing and disturbing the architect-client relationship before and during the construction phases. This is an attempt to provide a recourse to both the architect and the client to establish a healthy business relationship that will ensure the success of any project. As a start, I would like to go over to Deboshish with my first question. Deboshish, how important do you think is to understand the client insight or vision before embarking on any project?
Yeah, thank you, Amitabh. Hello, everybody. First of all, as an architect, apart from being an architect, I mean, he has to be a business analyst also. More than that, a psychoanalyst. What I feel is that understanding the client's requirement and understanding his psychology is a very important and an integral matter while before coming into the design process. The architect has to take into consideration the client's want, what he needs, and what are the requirements that he is planning to incorporate in his design, in the project. I feel that it's not just a single fit solution that we have to incorporate only basic form of design or subject to the project. Apart from that, we need to do many homeworks after the meeting, initial meetings are done with the client, and these homeworks are required before embarking on the project.
Thank you, Deboshish. I think it is very important to understand the client's insight, to see the other side of the story, listen to that, understand, and then only we should proceed further. The client comes to an architect with a lot of expectations, and they entrust them to the creativity of an architect. While doing so, how is it necessary for the architect to go to realize such trust?
Thank you, Amitabh. Good evening to everyone here. It's very important for an architect to meet the expectations and trust of the client. This really starts at the stage where you sit down with a client, you have interaction with the client, and also the taste, the kind of taste they have and the expectations. So, as an architect, it will help the architect to have time something to achieve the design that the client is looking for, because it's that we as architects are not just designers, but we are also responsible for the eventual cost of the project. So it's very important that we keep that in mind and we design something that fits within the client's budget, and also in turn gives the true value of a well-designed space.
So basically, it's about trust, building that trust within a client before embarking on his assignment. The idea is like, how far should we really stretch ourselves to that extent?
I think the client ultimately comes to an architect because not just of what he can design, but also because he takes into account of what can be achieved within what kind of a budget. And if we can do a cost saving for the client's happy, but we also in turn end up achieving something ourselves, because we might not have achieved the spectacular design we had in mind initially, but then we do end up learning to design something within set budget. We need to understand materials. That's very important because it's not just one type of material you can construct. We all know that we can use various materials. We can play with materials to adjust it to the cost and get the design we want. So I think it's very important, because if a client trusts us, that plays for us in the long end, because he's going to recommend us to other people, and his recommendation is what is like an advertisement for us architects.
Okay, I think that serves the purpose of the question. And usually, a client approaches an architect on the basis of reputation, either on reputation or on recommendation, or on the basis of a personal acquaintance. Well, is the criteria really important? Is your approach to the work different in each case?
Okay, so I'll put it in a way. See, when I think it comes in the life of all consultants or architects. Once we start our career, we get projects through personal acquaintance. Then once we have crossed few years and we have made up some buildings, then it comes to us through recommendation. And then after a certain stage, when we have built up our reputation, then the projects come through reputation. So here I'll say a small example or a small story which we have been told in our college days. An architecture project comprises of three stages. One is getting the project, another one is retaining the project, and the third one is completing the project or say getting your fees out of the project. So according to the mentor who taught us, getting a project is very easy these days. The hardest and the toughest part is retaining the project. So during the course of the project, there are a lot of ups and downs, there are difference of opinion, there are a lot of changes which the clients ask for, we are not willing to do, or a lot of ideas we give which the clients are not willing to do. So here is where the way the client comes into play. So if it has come through a personal acquaintance, both the parties tries not to spoil the personal relationship, so the bitterness doesn't develop. If it has come from recommendation, the client has heard about us by very less sources. So in that case, the chances of getting the relation bitter is very high. And if it has come through reputation, the 80% of our job is done because the client already has faith in our work, in our subject. So he would agree to what we are saying. So in that case, the chances of developing a better relationship is very less.
So that, in that sense, would your approach be different for the different clients in these cases? I mean, if a client approaches you because of your reputation, would your approach be different from somebody who has come from personal acquaintance?
We need to be more careful with people who have come through personal acquaintance. So the design approach or the project approach is always same, but the way of dealing with the client might differ if it is a personal acquaintance or a reputation built up client.
I think that was a tricky question. He dealt it very well. And architects are trained to visualize projects till its completion, long before its execution. Oftentimes, there is a conflict when a client who cannot visualize a project in its entirety from drawings and at a late stage realize that the project is not heading in the right direction. And then he or she calls for a complete change and overhauling of the project at a very later stage. Ragini, I'll come to you with this. You have been associated with lot of green building assignments, and you have closely worked with clients who are not directly the end users, but who are probably consultants, co-consultants, or any other from any other I would say service provider. So, how is your approach in such cases? Like, do you come across any such hindrances in your profession?
Thank you for the question. My range of clients might be slightly different. So tomorrow you can be my client, any other architect can be my client, a developer can be my client, or maybe even a corporate or a government official. So the basis I think will remain the same. So for an architecture project, like you said, visualization is important. So we are talking about understanding, because oftentimes the clients don't have that visual perspective like we do. And we always have to take guide or take advantage that we can show that 3Ds or walkthroughs or something like that. Similarly, for me, I think if I am going to suggest something to my client, for example, if I say that from a green building perspective, use this kind of material, or because I'll be very specific about the specifications. For example, select this kind of glass. Why do you need to select is something I have to be clear at the very start. If I'm telling them to orient it in a particular way, why I have to do, so that there is a clear understanding right at the beginning. I think even for this case, we have to be very clear, and this can be backed up with a lot of for architecture we are talking about 3Ds. For my case, maybe take the help of visualization softwares. Like I'll simulate it in a daylight simulation. I'll show that this much of daylight is coming in because you're making the windows this much size, or maybe I can show you through savings that you're saving this much of energy because you're using this kind of glass, or maybe you're orienting in that way. So I think for same case also, for someone to come on board and do what we ask them to do, I think it's important that we communicate it properly. And also one more thing, that we shouldn't be telling these things like it's an option, you do it or not. But I think somewhere we have to understand that it should be like a universal way in which people start designing and inputting all these things. And of course, some clients are very tricky, and we have to take more efforts. But I think it can be done. If
But
we
in
are
your
clear.
case, I think you are mostly dealing with professionals.
Yeah.
And I think your work is much easier that
Yeah.
way, in the sense if they are all well equipped with what is going to come. They can visualize things the way you want them to visualize, right?
Yeah, little bit of an effort is
So
required,
you are
but
basically dealing with trained clients.
yes.
Thank you for your insight into your part of the work also. A constructive relationship between architects and clients can provide an opportunity for enhancing their mutual ambitions. Who hasn't heard of an architect grumble about making design compromises because of client demands? I'll come to you, Pritam, with this question. Uh, how difficult it is for us to build this foundation of trust with clients?
First of all, I would say that this client architect relationship, it's a two-way process. So both are responsible for initially building up the trust. Basically, the client is more responsible, I would say. It's my experience, what I'm sharing. There are two types of clients. All of us have found that one we can say is a one-time client and other is a repetitive one. Although there is one more angle to it, because once the architect has got some reputation, automatically that trust has already been built up. So there is no point of
reputation builds up trust. That's
yes,
a
yes,
good
yes.
point.
So I would say the first step, I'll not say it is very easy or very tough, but what I would say or I'd share it, like the first step to build up a trust is to speak up. Clients nowadays come with preconceived ideas because of Google, internet. They already, when they come to an architect, they already become a half architect. And a lot many times they give good suggestions or good ideas or weird ideas also. So basically, you need to speak up. I'll give a small example. Like if you go to a doctor with your problems or some difficulties, you have to speak up. You cannot hide anything. Similarly, the client, until and unless speaks up, tells about the requirements and whatever ideas, the visualizations. By the time you can understand his psychology, what type of client he is and what he's actually looking for. So after that, you have, being an architect, we also have to share that whatever he is trying to say, whether it is wrong or whether it is right, or you can add to it. Obviously, if it is saying something constructive, we should adapt to it. So more you speak, more you get to know about the client. So that is, I think, the first step. You can build the trust, and I don't think so it is very tough.
Basically, you have to be honest with your recommendations.
Yes, exactly. You have to be honest with your profession.
In the history of architecture, we have seen that there has often been an unseen contradiction between what the architect wants to design and what the client wants to build. Sometimes an architect will get so wrapped up in his vision and personal aesthetic values that what the client likes and does not like becomes secondary or is overlooked completely. Deboshish, I'll come to you with this question. How do you balance your creative interests with the functional and aesthetic vision of your client? That's a pertinent question. We have been struggling all along with this. Your views on that?
First of all, aesthetic is an adjective term, I feel. It means beauty and art. And it can be expressed only in some physical form. Whereas functionality represents function and it represents activities which are essential to understand while designing the project. So now these two terms are quite different in nature, and the challenges lies there. How an architect will create a balance between these two, and moreover he has to think about what the client wants, and moreover he has to balance in such a way the client feels that this is what he was dreaming about. I'll cite a small example that I had a client, like husband and wife, who came for designing three-story building. Now the client approached for the first time, and he had showed me an approach with I think around 30 to 40 pictures of buildings. Normally the clients approaches the architect with certain pictures which they normally dream about. So they showed it to me, and I was going through it, and I was just wondering like what they are going to express, what they mean by it. In fact, they were unable to express. Finally, I got an idea that let me just go through it once, and found that there were two similar things which were relevant in those pictures. All the buildings were in a linear form. There were no curves in it, and mostly had glass facades. Immediately, I pointed out, see, you want a building with a glass facade, and you want a building which is straight and which has certain fenestrations. And they were absolutely convinced, and they expressed that this is the thing that we want. So now, I would conclude by saying that it's very essential to understand the psychology of the client, what they try to express.
I think that's very well put, Debashish. I think that was a eureka moment for you when you discovered that they want a linear form and some glasses in the facade. So I think everybody should try and catch hold of that eureka moment. But that sometimes we miss most of the time.
Absolutely.
And,
I just said about the positive part of it.
Absolutely.
I'm not going into the negative part.
Yes. The other professions really have this problem. Doctors and lawyers are usually acknowledged to be the decision makers and authorities in their respective fields. Science and the written law are established and much less subject to interpretation compared to artistic values and visions. I'll come to you, Ayanjeet, with a question. In this kind of situation, how well can you navigate as a professional while catering to the views and opinions of your client?
It depends on client to client. Certain clients are very hard to deal with because you have to really convince them hard. And it always helps when the client has traveled, has read, has experienced good architecture. For such clients, it becomes easy to convince them. I mean, now we have 3D walk-ins, we have 3D videos and everything like that, but still that does not sometimes give the true essence of a space, the texture, the feel, the volume. So it's like, so this is where the client and architect's trust really comes into play, because if the client trusts you, then it becomes a little easier for them to convince them. But then if the client is like really adamant, they're like, no, I think this will look good and this is the way we want it, then you can negotiate or you can try to come to an understanding. But if that doesn't work, then I think it's better to back off, let them do it their way, because at the end, I told you so sounds much sweeter.
Because all clients have an opinion when it comes to artistic values.
Yes.
Most clients have an opinion. So basically the question was on that. Where the other professionals, they don't get questioned. Like the doctors and the lawyers, they don't get questions because those are established facts. Many good architects have never had the opportunity to build more than a handful of buildings. That's a fact. Because of this contradiction between client needs and the architect's creative vision. In this context, Ragini, I would come to you. How do you see this breach happening? Any possibility that such a merger can be enforced?
Your statement that usually if you talk about any architectural award, it's not really given on the basis of how well you executed the project, but might be like whenever we see any awards or any criterias, it's usually on the creativity or the unique style, functionality, aesthetics and all these things. And I think as far as my knowledge, that is the way it is selected. And I think mostly this is because you cannot really quantify how well your project was executed. Because it's a long process from the conceptual stage to the end product that we get. And when we're talking about the creativity style, because we are getting a product which we can see, that's why the judgment is based on that. And the process of execution is kind of tricky to, I think we need some kind of documentation, which is a very far off way to say, and I don't know how much it's possible. But what if we can document the project was executed, the best practices that can be done, and even be an inspiration from for other projects? That's one way to think about it, and maybe in future some awards will take into account that, okay, this project was actually flawlessly executed. Having said this, I also think that for any great project, I'm not talking about general projects, but if you're talking about an award level project, I think without the coordination or the understanding between the different people involved, like the clients, the architects, the other consultants, civil, mechanical, plumbing, all these consultants, if there was no understanding, I think execution of the project would have not been possible. And again, every project is different and every client is different, so that is also something we cannot quantify, but hopefully if we can show it in some way, that would be great.
So what you're trying to say basically is a collaborative effort. There's a lot of
Yeah.
other factors apart from the creative aspirations of an architect which are in play.
Yeah.
And until and unless everybody collaborates and contributes to the success of the project, it's very difficult to pull off. That clients are not trained to visualize the end product. So architects are trained to visualize the end product, and it is the architect's responsibility to guide the clients as to how the project would come up eventually. So somewhere down the line there was a communication gap, and the client could never understand what was coming actually. I think there are a lot of debates. I think debate will go on. There is no end to that. I'll just come a little away from what we have been discussing and coming into a different domain of public sector projects, because there the clientele is totally different. Especially in India, where we have seen that it's mostly a tender-based kind of system, where the lowest quoted bidder is awarded a project based on his earlier credentials or similar kind of works. Eventually, the architect receives a brief from the concerned department agency, based on which he tries to put his best foot forward. Avinash, in such cases, where do you see the challenges? I mean, if any at all. I mean,
the challenge is not for the L1 bidder, because he, in his full senses and willingly, has quoted that amount. He has not been forced to quote that L1 amount, so he should be in a position to render 100% of his service for whatever L1 money he has quoted. Now the challenge is actually for the L2, L3 and the L4, who in their next project are forced to quote below their standard of fees to fetch the work, because everyone needs work. So the challenges is for the L1, L2, L3 bidders then. Here I would just put a suggestion to everyone here that irrespective of what the fees you are getting, you render a service which is more than what you are getting paid off. And believe me, once you are working in that mindset that irrespective of what you are getting, your service should be 100% or say more than 100%. You will have a feeling of work satisfaction. You will feel that you have not cheated a client. You have given the most you could have given to the client, and then you will feel satisfied. And this L1, L2 and all this fees, eventually the money will flow once you have started giving good work. People will recognize you and the money will flow.
tell me your take on that.
Actually, I was thinking, I'd say it in two parts. So already one part had been described by Avinash. So I won't say on the tender part, because we everybody know and had suffered because of that particular low, because there is no limit of that low. It can go as low as you cannot even imagine. Now when you are dealing with a group of individuals, there are a lot of stakeholders. So the client, the government agency will be implementing the project, then the contractors and other stakeholders. Now the stakeholders basically can be public, can be the press, can be the intellectuals, and even in most of the cases the politicians. So initially when you start to make a concept, first of all you start trying to have the requirements, and that becomes a very challenging task, because nobody knows. So, and you can see the buildings which are public buildings are not residential buildings. They are mostly institutional buildings, hospitals, colleges, schools, office buildings. Now, office buildings to some extent are they're easy because they have a standard set of cadre and designations, hierarchies, everything is fixed. Projects where you are designing a culture kind of a project, suppose. So there, the requirements are not fixed, and there are a hierarchy of peoples who each will have a different opinion. So gathering those requirements to first framing your design and then making a concept becomes very tough. Secondly, in the execution part, again, that's a big challenge because I'm talking about the stakeholders. Everybody will have a different opinion with a different level of knowledge about architecture. There are people who ask for replicas, who want to replicate buildings. So, the concept stage, you have to convince all stakeholders. You never know when there will be a new stakeholder who crops up and says, "Oh, how come this happened? How come this is culturally not possible? This is that is against our rituals, against our traditions." So, a lot of things comes up. And again, you are saying about Japi things. So, where is the cultural element?
So I think it's a lot more complicated than
Yes,
what.
yes.
Thank you, Pritam. I think that's a good insight that you have thrown on public projects, and more so because there is public money involved in it. The stakes are very high, and that's why, rightly so, public projects are most vulnerable to criticism. In these kind of situations, Pritam, again, I'll ask you, how big is the responsibility?
Yes, I had already told that you have the full responsibility for liability for whatever you are going to do. And from the concept stage to the execution stage, you have to answer to any of the stakeholders. Now, there is a very tricky situation. Like, you want to create something very elegant, no? Where in execution part comes, I'm talking very practically speaking about using of materials, selection of materials, how you're going to do it. Now, since it's the involvement of public money, so you're doing a project somewhere, and a lot of stakeholders come up and they say, "Oh, what is the necessity of using such high cost materials? This wasting of public money, and then be used by these blah 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 persons, and there is no necessity of using such kind of costly materials." In the other hand, if you are going to use relatively low cost materials, then the same people might come up and say, "Arey, see the quality of the building, they are using inferior quality products." So these are very tricky situations where you have to justify yourself. You have to justify whatever you are going to use, because you are going to use the public money, you are answerable to it. And talking about this use of materials, where people come say and wasting of public money, and at times they say, no, they are using inferior kind of materials. So I have a very funny example. One of my projects, basically, as there are a lot of stakeholders, even in the client also, in the government agency, they will be finding people of different hierarchy. So 4 or 5 people involved, and they come to a regular inspection of the site. So one of my sites was going on, and the staircase granite fixation has been already done. So we fixed the granite on the staircases. It was planed and all those whatever designs were there. It was done. Now the person went into the site, and there was a checking of everything what is going on. So what he asked is, what is the brand of this granite? There is no brand written in the granite. Now, I don't know how to answer to this question. I don't have that answer to this question. So ultimately, somehow we say this blah blah, and then this natural stone. Ultimately, you have to convince him. No, I find this very foolish kind of a thing. So these type of funny situations will come around. So whatever Amitabh had said, we have to be very. In fact, we are responsible, and we have to justify whatever we are going to do, and why we are going to do, why this, why that, why this material, why this design. So everything has to be properly done in a developing of the concept stage.
So the challenges are tremendous, that you can understand. So to conclude it, this is a common question to all the panelists. If it's a one-liner, one word, anything that you want to say, what approach would you suggest to maintain this equilibrium of sorts, like this conflict that we generally face with our clients? For many architects, it's a perennial dilemma. Any middle of the road kind of solution you think that will probably provide the post to both the sides. Start off with Deboshish.
I feel it has to be both sided, first of all, and we basically have to understand the psychology of the client and we have to convince them in such a way that the client is convinced.
Thank you. Ragini?
I think communication is the key, and have to have clarity, and also we have to give some kind of importance to the clients because finally we are talking about
Communication.
his
Communication
money.
is the right word.
Yeah.
I got it. Ayanjeet?
I agree. I mean, clarity and communication, and leave nothing for later. That we'll adjust it later because that later can create a lot of problems.
Right.
Yeah, I agree to both Ragini and as well as Ayanjeet. And I want to add one more thing to it. Being an architect, you have to be a very good diplomat.
We have to turn the table. We have to be. We have to sit on the client side, put us on in the client's boot, and understand what he feels and what they are looking at.
One word I think everybody would want to agree with that is honesty. Honesty on part of the architect in understanding and communicating with the client and giving his honest views to all his queries and all his requirements. I think that winds up this particular panel discussion. It has been a very engrossing and very interesting panel. And I thank all the panelists for sparing their valuable time to be here on stage and sharing their views with us. And I thank the organizers, the building material reporter once again for giving me this opportunity to host this discussion. Thank you so much.